Nigeria is one of the countries in West Africa, actually the largest country in West Africa. It was invented in 1914 by the British. Before the British arrived in that part of the world, there were hundreds of very different nations having little or no connection to one another. But after the British arrived in the 19th century, after the Berlin Conference, they brought all these peoples together and formed a country they named after the largest river in the area, that is River Niger. And from day one, the other ethnicities had a problem with these Igbo people. And before it snowballed into a genocide, there had been so many what people called pogroms. But in 1960, from 1966 to 1970, it snowballed into a genocide. I'll read from a prepared text. There were two countries that existed in West Africa. One is still existing, that is Nigeria. The British invented the first in 1914, just as I had outlined in my brief introduction. And by 1967, pogroms and an ethnic cleansing forced the creation of the second, that was Biafra. The people that may be familiar with the term Biafra are people that are, let's say, from 65 years up, because this happened in 1967 to 1970. This Biafra was invented by the group I just described, the Igbo people. This group was the group that produced Nnamdi Azikiwe. Nnamdi Azikiwe was the founder of Pan-Africanism in the African continent. If you talk about Pan-Africanism in the whole world, that would be Edward Blyden, another Igbo as well, who was born in St. Thomas in the Caribbean. The Igbo people also, you may be familiar with Chinua Achebe. He passed on in 2016 or thereabouts, Africa's greatest novelist. Then Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and Uju Anya, the lady whose tweet nearly took down Twitter a few months ago. And this nation was formed by this ethnic group and several other nations that we are part of, that we are its neighbors. And why did they form this nation? Biafra, it was formed because of anti-Igbo pogroms. Between 1966 and 1970, this nation, which created Biafra and which has been historically known as Jews, was fallen upon by the other Nigerian nations and was nearly exterminated. Their own territory, when the killing started, the Nigerian government carved out these other peoples that joined in inventing Biafra. They carved them out and declared that they did not have issues with those people. They were strict that the people they had problems with were the Igbo people. So their territory, exclusively called Biafra, was turned into a facsimile of the killing fields of Cambodia and the extermination and death camps of Nazi-ruled Europe. Other Nigerian nations, members of other Nigerian nations, left their farms. Men from the countries in the Sahel, that is the Sahara Desert, and pilots from Egypt all signed up to be enlisted in the Nigerian army to join in the annihilation of this nation, which is also called Igbo or Igbo. The three most prominent identifications of this group while the genocide was going on was Igbo or Jews of Africa. American Secretary of State as at then, Henry Kissinger, in his memo to President Nixon, Describing what was happening, Kissinger noted the Igbos were the Jews of West Africa. To arm this horde, Britain opened its armories and shipped whatever it did not use in World War II to Nigeria. Its ideological adversary, the Soviet Union, sent Nigeria its mixed fighters and the Ilyushin bombers, and the killings escalated. Many people have wondered why ideological opponents like Britain and the Soviet Union chose to be on one side in what they termed a conflict. Well, we think they chose to be on one side because a group they perceived as a common enemy was involved. To ensure that no member of this group survived, Britain also sold ships to Nigeria to enforce a 30-month blockade of food imports, and the imperiled people got their own Holodomor. The only difference between what happened between the starvation of the Ukrainian people and the starvation of the Igbo people was that most of a good number, more than half of the infants of the Igbo people were wiped out. The ugly sounding name Kwashiorkor began to be in use because that was what Igbos who were deprived of food deliberately were suffering from. And these mass killings gave rise to Médecins Sans Frontières. Some medical doctors from France, in sympathy, formed themselves into a group and began to treat victims. These Jews of Africa tried to defend themselves, to fight for their lives. For 30 months they tried against all the odds, but they lost. They lost because they were fighting without weapons. They were defending themselves without weapons. A blockade which stopped food from getting somewhere would definitely restrict the entry of weapons. And while the mass murders were going on, Yotant of the United Nations, to his eternal shame and disgrace, held it was Nigeria's internal affair. He ignored the convention which recognized or which declared that there should be an intervention if it is discovered that a government is mistreating its citizens. But Yotant declared that this was an internal affair of Nigeria and that Africa should handle it. Well, the big powers could not do anything because one of them, Britain, had done its homework very well. As the mass killings happened, the press poured in, took photographs of humans who had been reduced to near skeletons, and reports began to fill the world that Auschwitz-Birkenau had risen in Nigeria and the Nazis resurrected as Nigerians. Humanity's loss in Biafra was colossal. Had Raphael Lemkin been alive when the 3 millions were cut off, he might have wondered if his life's labors was worth the trouble. The exterminated had largely been forgotten, buried in scholars' quote discussions that barely relate to what victims experienced. I'm looking very, very carefully at records. I am a survivor myself. I know what my people passed through. I experienced it. I live with the trauma every day, but what my colleagues in academia do is that they explore legalism. They say the world did not recognize it. This authority did not recognize it as genocide. So they base what they write on that, and to me, that is very, very insensitive. It departs so much from what the people themselves experienced. But survivors have not forgotten, even though this genocide has largely been forgotten. Only last year, Uju Anya, a professor at Mellon Carnegie University, United States, lost her temper and attacked the dying Queen Elizabeth II because, according to Uju Anya, she was the head of the British government, which its role in the crime was central. And before this, the great Chinua Achebe, and before the great Chinua Achebe passed on, he remembered the genocide that brought the Holocaust alive in there was a country called Nigeria. And here I close my presentation. Thank you.